Cerf typed an L and spoke into the telephone. "Did you get the L?" he asked. "I got the L," said the other engineer. Cerf typed an O. "What about that?" he asked. "Did you get an O?" "I got an O." So Cerf typed a G to complete the first word ever sent over a network. "Did you get the G?" he asked. No G." The network had crashed. "No problem," said Vint Cerf. "You got the L and the O, say them together. L-O. Sounds like hello, doesn't it?" It only took a few more hours until the network worked properly. The first message was not important, but the event was. Despite all the theory and the tests which proved that the ARPANET should work, the connection between UCLA and Stanford proved that the network did work. It was the first time that distant computers had ever talked to each other. The ARPANET was the first computer network. Soon it would become the heart of a network of networks, the Internet. Chapter 3. To the Internet. 2 more hosts were planned in BBN's contract with ARPA. They were connected to the ARPANET before the end of 1969 in Utah and Santa Barbara. Bob Taylor's idea of a network of 4 computers was a reality. Taylor left ARPA soon afterwards, but the network continued to grow. Larry Roberts became the new boss of ARPA's computer department. He soon called Frank Hart at BBN. "We'd like you to build more IMPs and connect more hosts to the network." "How many?" asked Frank Hart. "As many as you can." "Really?" "Yes," replied Roberts. "Every new site on the network is saving me money. Every time someone asks me for a new computer, I can say, 'You should connect your existing machines to the network.' In a few years, the network will pay for itself." The network was a great success for the hosts as well as ARPA. They did not lose any computer power as they had feared. They could use computers at other sites, so they gained, and they could also work more efficiently. As Bob Taylor had planned, the universities could work together on projects instead of repeating each other's work. However, some effects of the network were not in the plan. For example, the telephone companies began to get calls from ARPANET engineers. "Your line from Santa Barbara to UCLA is in trouble," the engineer might say. "Okay," said the telephone company. "Which end are you at?" "Neither. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts." "Where?" "Cambridge. So how do you know about the lines in California?" "I'm on the ARPANET." "The what?" The IMPs were designed to make constant checks on the condition of the network. This meant that ARPA's engineers often knew more about the performance of the telephone system than the telephone companies that owned and operated it. There were other new possibilities. With the network, BBN was able to send new software to the IMPs immediately, as soon as it was written. Before this, engineers had to fly from place to place with paper tapes in their bag. But now, if one of the IMPs had a problem, it was very often possible for BBN to fix it from the company's offices many hundreds of kilometers away. But the biggest surprise was that the network was soon being used mostly for something that was never part of Bob Taylor's plan: chat. Technically, the network worked exactly as it was designed to. Yet by 1973, 3/4 of all traffic on the ARPANET was nothing to do with sharing data or programs or logging on to distant computers. It was electronic mail, email. Ray Tomlinson was the first person to send email on the ARPANET. He was an engineer at BBN, and in 1972 he invented a simple program for sending files between computers. The big mainframe computers at the universities already had mailboxes for all the different people who used the machines. People could send messages to other people who used the same computer, but there was no email between different computers. Tomlinson's program changed this. The software opened a connection. sent a file to another computer, and then sent a message back to say that the file had arrived safely at its destination. Since the mailboxes and computers are really just files, the next step was simple. Tomlinson changed his program so that it carried a mail message from one computer and added it to a mailbox file of another machine. Since everyone on the ARPANET already had mailboxes in their host machines, it was easy to begin sending mail to other hosts. But the speed with which emails spread was surprising. Almost as soon as it was introduced, it took over the network. Even today, there are more individual email messages sent over the internet than data of any other kind. Ray Tomlinson has left his mark on every single one of the billions of emails that have been sent since 1972. He was the person who chose the @ sign, which means at in email addresses. Why at? Well, at that time, no one had an @ sign in their name, says Tomlinson. I'm not sure that that is still true because there are a lot of strangely spelled names out there now. By 1972, the ARPANET included dozens of sites, but hardly anyone knew about the network. Larry Roberts decided that this must change. He asked Bob Kahn at BBN to organise a public show. Kahn picked the International Conference on Computer Communication as the place to show the network to the world. The conference was held at the Hilton Hotel in Washington at the end of October. Larry Roberts contacted all of the people around the USA who were now using his system. Many of them agreed to take part in the show. It was a real test of the network. In one example, a computer in Washington contacted another machine right across the country at UCLA and told it to run a program. When it had finished, this program then called Washington with the results and printed them out on a printer that sat on a table right next to the first computer. There were also programs that allowed people to play games over thousands of kilometres. And a group from MIT brought a clever machine that was like a mechanical spider. This machine could be controlled over the network and guided through a room full of furniture, although its owners were many kilometres away. But not everything went smoothly. The team with the printer could not make it work, although the network said that all the data was moving between the sites just as it was supposed to. Then someone looked around and noticed that the mechanical spider was jumping about in a mad dance. The UCLA computer had been connected to the spider by mistake. The dance was the data that was intended for the printer. However, most of the problems were small, and most of the guests at the conference were amazed by the network. After this, the ARPANET began to grow even more rapidly. But now it was not the world's only network of computers. After the ARPANET had shown that a computer network could be built and that it could be useful, other networks began to appear. Universities, government departments and other organisations saw that networking could multiply the power of their computers and the power of the people who used them. But these new networks created their own rules. A system that was best for the ARPANET did not necessarily suit other organisations with different needs, different styles of work, and different hardware. So, once again, there were many different computer systems that could not talk to each other. Now, just a few years after the ARPANET was invented, the appearance of new networks had once again created the problem that had caused Bob Taylor to imagine the world's first computer network. By this time, Bob Kahn was in charge of the ARPANET project. He was very familiar with the new problem because he had worked on some of the newer networks. They were all designed to deal with different circumstances. For example, the AlohaNet network in Hawaii used radio waves to deal with the problem of communicating over mountains and between different islands. The network in the San Francisco area was not even fixed. It was on lorries which moved around from place to place. The Atlantic Packet Satellite Network used another system, sending messages up to satellites in space to communicate across half the world. On one of his visits to San Francisco, Bob Kahn went to see Vint Cerf, who was now at Stanford. "I need to find a way to connect these new networks," said Kahn. "They're not like the ARPANET. They all use their own software and hardware. It's a mess." "They're not going to change over to the ARPANET system now," said Cerf. "They've spent too much money and the systems work." "I know, but I still need a way to join them together. It's worse than before the ARPANET. At least then we didn't know what a network could do." "So what do you want to do?" Cerf asked. "I don't know. How do we make a network of networks?" "The imps were the answer for the ARPANET." "But they were built to link together different computers, not different networks," said Bob Kahn. "All these new networks have got their own imps, completely different to ours." "I know, but couldn't you still put something like an imp between the different networks?" "What do you mean?" "Well, you need a kind of gate to each network," said Cerf. "The networks would still be under the control of their own imps, but the gate would tell each network how to communicate with the others." "So the gate is like an imp, a box that stands between the different systems?" "Yes," said Cerf. "But instead of translating between different computer systems, the gate will translate between different networks and reduce the number of differences between them." "Will you work with me on it?" Vint Cerf agreed to work with Bob Kahn, and they began to write software that allowed different networks to communicate. In the set of rules that they invented in 1973, they used the word Internet for the first time. It meant a network of networks. The software wrapped the messages from each different network inside Internet envelopes. Then the messages could leave their home network and travel from one gate to another. There they were taken from the envelopes and sent into the second network. The risk of losing messages between different networks is much higher than the risk of losing them between different computers. But Cerf and Kahn's rules are still the glue that holds the Internet together today, more than a quarter of a century after they wrote them. Bob Kahn and Vint Cerf thought that demand for the Internet would grow, but they never imagined the size of the growth. The late 1970s and 1980s saw an explosion in the use of computers and networks. The fuel for this explosion was the arrival of the personal computer. Chapter 4. The Personal Computer. One night in January 1975, Bill Gates was playing cards with some friends at Harvard University. He was 19 years old and he was studying law, but his first love was computers. Suddenly, his friend Paul Allen rushed into the room carrying a magazine. "Bill, come on, you've got to see this." "I'm playing cards," said Bill. "Are you winning?" "No, but—" "Well, this is our chance to win big. It's what we've been waiting for," said Paul. Bill left his game and looked at the magazine that Paul had brought. On the magazine's cover was a picture of a new computer called the Altair. Paul and Bill were both amazed and excited. The Altair was what they had both been dreaming of, the world's first personal computer. Bill and Paul had both loved computers for many years, from the time when they were at school in Seattle. They had already started a company together, which used computers to calculate the best routes for traffic on busy roads. But both of them saw that the Altair was their big chance. For years they had believed that there would soon be personal computers, small machines that anyone could buy and use. New chips were being produced that had much of the power of the older mainframes, but were tiny and cheap. But the computer industry was only interested in making big, expensive machines for business, and in 1975 the computer industry was almost completely controlled by one company, IBM. "It's easy to forget how powerful IBM was," says Bill Gates today. "When you talk to young people who've only come into the industry recently, there's no way you can get that into their heads." In 1975, IBM was the computer industry. It was the biggest company in the business, and it was bigger, richer, and much more powerful than all other computer companies together. If IBM saw no future for personal computers, how could the Altair succeed? But Bill Gates and Paul Allen believed that there could be an enormous market for machines like the Altair, a market of people just like them. They were people who loved computers and who would give anything to have their own machine. "Wow," said Bill Gates as he read about the Altair. "We knew that someone was going to do something with these new chips, but it's hard to believe it's actually happened." "We've got to do something about it." "They're going to need software, right?" "Right." "Well, let's get them on the phone and tell them what we can do." "OK," said Paul, "I'll make the call." The company that was making the Altair was called MITS in Albuquerque, New Mexico, nearly 3,220 kilometers away from Harvard. The company was owned by a man named Ed Roberts. Paul phoned Ed. "We've got a really good program and it's just for your machine," he said. "It's nearly finished and we'd like to come and show it to you." "Fine," said Ed Roberts. "I'll meet you at the airport." However, Bill and Paul had a big problem. They had not actually written the program that they had promised. So they sat down and worked as hard as they could. After several days and nights at their desks, they had nearly finished a program that would allow the basic computer language to be used on the Altair computer. But the day before the trip to Albuquerque, Paul said, "There's still a problem, Bill." "What? Everything looks fine to me." "No, not a problem with the program. We haven't got enough cash to fly all the way to New Mexico." "How much have we got?" "Just enough for one ticket." "Well, why don't you get some sleep?" said Bill. "I'll stay up and finish the program, and you can fly down and show it to Ed Roberts." So Paul Allen flew down alone. When Ed Roberts met him at the airport in Albuquerque, Paul was surprised. He expected the boss of a new technology company to look rich and powerful, but Ed seemed like Paul himself, but older. He was an engineer dressed in jeans who drove an old van, and MITS's factory and office was a very ordinary building in a cheap area of the town. It looked like any small engineering factory on the edge of a city, but it was the birthplace of the personal computer, the machine that would change the world more than anything since the invention of the motor car. Ed Roberts did not really want to be the father of the personal computer. He wanted to be a doctor, but he had always loved engineering, and he read all the books he could find about making your own machines. After a period in the Air Force, engineering seemed the best way to make a living. But by 1975, Ed Roberts owed almost $400,000, and MITS was close to going out of business. The company sold equipment to people whose hobby was electronics. With parts from MITS, these people could build their own electronic calculator for less than $100. At this time, a similar machine cost 4 times as much in a shop. But other bigger companies quickly entered the market, charging even lower prices than MITS. Soon Ed Roberts needed $65,000 just to stay in business. But he had an idea for a new product. He explained it on a cassette tape that he sent to his friend Eddie Curry. Ed and Eddie exchanged cassette tapes because they were speaking so often on the telephone that they could not afford the bills. One day, Eddie received a tape on which Ed sounded even more excited than usual. "I'm going to build a computer," he said, "something anyone can buy. And there are people out there who will buy it. People like us, who want a computer more than anything else."